Imagine waking up to the world telling you that your identity has been erased. Not just your name, not just your title, but the very symbol that defined your existence in public life. 2 minutes ago, the UK Parliament made a historic, shocking decision that will forever alter the royal landscape. Prince Harry and Meghan Markle have officially been stripped of all royal titles, with King Charles himself approving the motion. Can you even begin to imagine how that feels? To be stripped bare of the privileges, the pomp, the perception of power you were born into or worked to earn. For many, this sounds like fiction. For Harry and Meghan, it's a reality that landed in their lives as abruptly as a thunderclap. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. The news broke like wildfire. Headlines flashed across screens around the world. Social media erupted in chaos, and royal commentators scrambled to make sense of what just happened. And yet, for those who follow the monarchy closely, this move was only the tip of the iceberg. There are layers of tension, betrayal, and strategic maneuvering behind this unprecedented action. It's a story that hits at the very heart of loyalty, legacy, and the intricate power dynamics that define the modern British monarchy. But let's pause for a moment. Why should this matter to you? After all, titles and privileges might seem like distant concerns to the average person. Yet the ramifications of this decision stretch far beyond Buckingham Palace or Kensington Gardens. They speak to the fragility of reputation, the price of defiance in elite circles, and the way personal choices can collide violently with institutional expectations. Harry and Meghan's journey, already filled with controversy, divorce from royal responsibilities, and media storms, has now reached a breaking point that could redefine the monarchy itself. And it all happened within the span of 2 minutes. Imagine the scene inside the palace when the news landed. King Charles, resolute but undoubtedly weighed down by the gravity of his decision, signing off on a parliamentary decree that would affect his son and daughter-in-law forever. Staff scrambling to process the legal implications. Advisors quietly exchanging concerned glances. And Harry and Meghan, thousands of miles away, watching the world unfold in real time, each moment loaded with disbelief, anger, and perhaps even fear. It is not just a loss of titles. It is, in many ways, the loss of a protective cloak, the symbolic representation of a life intertwined with royalty, status, and public perception. Let's rewind for context, because the story doesn't exist in a vacuum. Harry, the younger son of Prince Charles and Princess Diana, has always had a complicated relationship with his royal lineage. From childhood, he witnessed firsthand the pressures, the invasions of privacy, and the emotional toll of being born into a life where public duty often overshadowed personal desire. His marriage to Meghan Markle, once hailed as a modern fairy tale, intensified this scrutiny. From the very beginning, the couple was subjected to relentless media attacks, conflicting advice from palace insiders, and the impossible expectation of conforming to centuries-old traditions that were not built with them in mind. Their choice to step back from royal duties, though widely publicized, was only the beginning of a series of seismic shocks to the monarchy. And Meghan, a woman who once thrived on independence and public service, suddenly found herself navigating a world that constantly questioned her motives, her loyalty, and even her very right to exist within the royal sphere. The titles, the privileges, the ceremonial roles, they were meant to provide a shield. Yet instead, they became a target, a lightning rod for criticism, speculation, and sometimes outright hostility. And now, with this parliamentary action, even that shield has been stripped away, leaving Harry and Meghan exposed to an unprecedented level of scrutiny. You might be wondering, what drove Parliament to this point? Why now, after years of tension, public statements, and legal wrangling? The answer lies in a combination of timing, political maneuvering, and the perception of accountability. The monarchy, while steeped in tradition, does not exist in isolation. It operates in the public eye, under the constant gaze of lawmakers, media, and citizens alike. When Harry and Meghan began asserting more independence, both financially and in their media engagements, they challenged the status quo. They challenged the implicit rules of royal life, and with that challenge came consequences. But the details of those consequences, the full scope of political negotiations, and the private conversations behind closed doors are where the true drama lies, and it's only just beginning to surface. Consider this. Every royal decision is a statement. Every title conferred or revoked carries a weight of symbolism, a reflection of hierarchy, loyalty, and sometimes punishment. The revocation of Harry and Meghan's titles is not merely administrative. It is a message. It is a signal to the world that actions have consequences, that deviation from expected norms, no matter how justified it may seem, can result in public rebuke. Yet, there is also the personal layer, the heartbreak, the betrayal, and the isolation that comes when family decisions are entwined with public and political spectacle. This is a story not only about institutions, but about people. People who made choices, faced backlash, and now confront consequences that extend far beyond what anyone could have imagined. And the timing could not be more dramatic. 2 minutes ago, the news went public. The public's reaction was instantaneous: shock, outrage, support, disbelief. Social media erupted. Analysts scrambled to interpret the move. Meanwhile, insiders hinted at layers of secrecy, whisper campaigns, and perhaps even leaks from unexpected sources. What is known publicly is only a fraction of what happened behind closed doors. And what is yet to be revealed could rewrite the narrative entirely. This is not just a story about titles. This is a story about influence, perception, and the complex interplay between personal choices and institutional power. Think about the symbolism for a moment. Titles in the royal family are more than names. They are emblems of duty, heritage, and expectation. To strip them away is to strip away not just status, but identity. Harry loses the Duke of Sussex. Meghan loses the Duchess of Sussex. It may sound like semantics to some, but in the world they inhabit, it is seismic. Everything they were publicly recognized as, all the ceremonial privileges, are now gone. The world sees them differently, and so do those closest to them. The consequences extend beyond them as a couple. What about the children? What about public engagements, charitable initiatives, and international perception? The ripple effect is massive, and in true dramatic fashion, the story doesn't stop here. There are hints of private messages, unrecorded meetings, and potential confrontations that may erupt in ways the public cannot yet imagine. These are the elements that make this narrative gripping, the collision of private emotion with public spectacle. And that is where the stakes get even higher. Because this is not merely a story of titles lost. This is about legacy, power, family loyalty, and betrayal. Every revelation we uncover adds another layer of tension. And for those watching closely, it is impossible not to ask, what will Harry and Meghan do next? Will they retreat into private life, or will they strike back, publicly or otherwise? And most importantly, how will King Charles navigate the fallout, both within the family and in the court of public opinion? In the next chapter, we will explore the exact moment Parliament's decision was formalized and how the world reacted within minutes. We will peel back the layers of secrecy, examine the internal palace dynamics, and reveal the first glimpses of how Harry and Meghan processed the shock. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. 2 minutes ago, history was rewritten in Westminster. Can you imagine sitting in the House of Commons and hearing a motion passed that strips your son and daughter-in-law of the titles they've held all their adult lives? The chamber was silent for a heartbeat. Then, chaos erupted. Shouts, scribbled notes, whispers bouncing off the ornate walls. Politicians turning to one another, some shocked, others smug, and a few quietly relieved that the decision was finally out in the open. You could almost hear the sound of history snapping into a new, irreversible shape. Parliament's decision was not sudden. Behind closed doors, weeks of debate, negotiations, and back-channel communications had been simmering. But the speed of the public announcement, 2 minutes ago, made it feel instantaneous, like a thunderbolt striking a calm sky. Every journalist, every social media feed, every live broadcast picked up the story in real time. 2 minutes, and the world knew. Harry and Meghan no longer held any royal titles. Their ducal status, ceremonial privileges, all of it officially revoked. But why did Parliament act now? Why at this moment, and not earlier? The answers lie in layers of tension between the monarchy, political leaders, and the public. You see, Parliament doesn't act lightly. Votes that affect the royal family are often delayed, quietly debated, or managed behind the scenes. But this vote was different. It carried urgency. It carried pressure. And most importantly, it carried consequences that would ripple far beyond the walls of Westminster. Imagine the scene as the speaker called the vote. The room was packed with reporters, aides, and officials. Cameras flashed, capturing every reaction, every flicker of doubt or approval. When the final tally came, the decision was clear. The vote had passed overwhelmingly. And yet, even in that moment of clarity, the story was far from over. The decision itself was only the beginning. Because behind every vote, there are human reactions: anger, fear, betrayal, and in this case, a family torn apart in public view. Do you know what makes this story truly shocking? The speed with which King Charles approved the decision. Within moments, legal papers were signed, offices updated, and public notices drafted. The approval wasn't a cautious deliberation, it was decisive, deliberate, calculated. And for some insiders, this speed sent a chilling message. No one, not even the younger generation of royals, is untouchable. Parliament's justification for the decision was framed around tradition, accountability, and public duty. Officials spoke of the need to maintain the integrity of the monarchy, the importance of preserving public trust, and the precedent that no one is above scrutiny. But if you peel back the rhetoric, there's another layer. One filled with politics, personal judgment, and perhaps even retribution. Could it be that the vote was influenced by the couple's media engagements, their financial independence, or their outspoken criticism of royal protocols? Many suggest yes. And some insiders whisper that private grievances played just as large a role as public duty. The public reaction was immediate, and it was explosive. Social media feeds were flooded with hashtags, memes, and hot takes. Some cheered, others screamed betrayal. Commentators debated for hours whether this move was fair or excessively punitive. Citizens weighed in with personal stories, reflecting on trust, loyalty, and the place of monarchy in modern life. And in the midst of all this, Harry and Meghan were left to process it from the other side of the world, thousands of miles away, watching as their identities were redefined in real time. But let's dive into the human side of Parliament for a moment. Picture the conversations, the whispered negotiations, the deals made behind velvet curtains. Politicians are not just actors on a stage. They are human beings with agendas, egos, and biases. And when it comes to the monarchy, those biases are amplified. Some members of Parliament reportedly saw this as a chance to assert authority over the royal narrative. Others viewed it as necessary, inevitable, and overdue. But there were also those who feared the backlash, both political and personal. A vote like this carries risk. It invites criticism, scrutiny, and media firestorms. Yet somehow, the decision passed. And then there's the symbolism. This vote was more than a legal formality. It was a statement. Stripping someone of royal titles is not just administrative. It is symbolic. It declares to the world that actions have consequences. That deviation from tradition, no matter how justified, will not go unnoticed. And in a family where symbolism matters more than almost anything else, this is seismic. Think about it. Harry loses Duke of Sussex. Meghan loses Duchess of Sussex. Every ceremonial function, every public engagement, every royal privilege tied to those titles evaporates. And with it, the protective aura that comes from being a royal in the eyes of the world. Now consider the timing again. 2 minutes ago, it was official. 2 minutes ago, the headlines broke. But behind the headlines, there was panic, scrambling, and silent fury. Advisors were rushing to update legal documents. Royal staff were recalculating schedules. Publicists were drafting responses. And Harry and Meghan, well, they had to absorb the shock. What would you do if the world suddenly told you that the life you knew, the identity you've been carrying for years, no longer exists? How do you even begin to process that in the public eye? The vote was met with shockwaves that crossed borders. International media covered it immediately, analyzing every angle, every potential fallout. Commonwealth leaders were reportedly briefed privately. Allies and critics alike watched closely. And the palace? Behind closed doors, the mood was tense, fraught with a mixture of satisfaction, apprehension, and concern. This was not just a vote. It was a spark in a powder keg, ready to ignite debates, scandals, and family confrontations. And yet, in the midst of all this, one question lingered. How did the vote even come together? Parliamentary insiders reveal a complex web of influence. Informal meetings, strategic leaks, pressure from media campaigns, and possibly even advice filtered directly from King Charles's inner circle. The decision may appear procedural on paper, but behind the scenes, it was anything but simple. Every yes vote carried not only the weight of legality, but the shadow of expectation, loyalty, and personal judgment. So where does that leave Harry and Meghan? Their titles are gone. Their public roles altered. Their identity, at least in official terms, stripped. And yet, this is just the beginning. Because when such a seismic decision lands, reactions are never linear. There will be calls for legal challenges, public statements, and private confrontations. There will be questions about succession, the role of the monarchy, and whether this move sets a precedent for other royals. And most importantly, there will be emotional fallout, anger, despair, perhaps even retaliation. Can you feel the tension building? Picture Harry reading the news. Picture Meghan on a call, the words sinking in, disbelief giving way to fury. Picture the palace staff, scrambling, knowing they are witnesses to history being made. And picture Parliament, members glancing at each other, realizing they have set into motion a chain of events no one can fully control. And just when you think the drama can't escalate further, there's the next bombshell. Sources suggest that not all members of Parliament were aware of every detail before the vote. Some were blindsided by internal memos, by briefings they weren't meant to see, by last-minute amendments whispered in hallways. Could it be that even among lawmakers, there were betrayals, miscommunications, hidden agendas waiting to surface? It's likely, and if true, the story is far from over. 2 minutes ago, the vote passed. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. A private message, a secret meeting, a leak that could undermine even the most carefully constructed narratives. Those were the elements ready to ignite the next stage of this unprecedented royal saga. What would you do if you had to choose between family loyalty and the weight of history? That's the question King Charles faced, 2 minutes after Parliament's historic vote stripped Harry and Meghan of their royal titles. Imagine the moment, sitting in your private chambers, watching a document arrive that would alter the lives of your own children forever. A decision that would reverberate through the halls of Buckingham Palace, across the country, and around the world. The weight of it is almost unimaginable. But for King Charles, there was no pause, no hesitation. The signatures were made. The approval was final. Why would he move so decisively? Some say it was a matter of principle. Others whisper about pressure from advisors, whispers from Parliament, and even subtle nudges from the public itself. But one thing is certain. This was not a decision made lightly. Every ounce of history, every precedent, every legacy factor weighed on him. And yet, he acted. With the weight of monarchy on his shoulders, Charles chose to approve what many would call a punitive measure against his own son and daughter-in-law. Inside the palace, reactions were mixed. Some staff nodded in silent approval, believing it was necessary to maintain the dignity of the crown. Others were shocked. How could a father approve such a sweeping action against his own family? Even within the royal circle, whispers of betrayal began to circulate. Was Charles motivated by duty or by a simmering resentment that had built over decades? It's impossible to understand this moment without considering Charles's long and complicated relationship with Harry. The younger prince has never shied away from challenging the monarchy's traditions, and Meghan's arrival only intensified those tensions. Publicly, Charles has maintained a stoic composure, projecting diplomacy and calm. Privately, sources say, the situation was fraught with frustration, concern, and perhaps even fear for the reputation of the monarchy. Each royal decision, each media interaction, each leak or public statement from Harry and Meghan put pressure on Charles to act decisively. Consider the symbolism. Approving the revocation of titles was not just about governance. It was a message. It was a signal to Harry and Meghan, and to the world, that the monarchy will not tolerate deviations from its expectations. Titles are more than names. They are the embodiment of duty, legacy, and hierarchy. To strip someone of them is to challenge their very identity within the royal structure. Charles's approval sent a clear message. No one, not even family, is above consequence. But there is more beneath the surface. Insiders reveal that Charles's decision may have been influenced by counsel from multiple quarters. Advisors concerned with public perception, legal teams reviewing the implications, and even members of parliament may have subtly shaped the narrative he faced. There are hints that private letters, unseen communications, and confidential meetings played a role. Some suggest that Charles had been weighing this decision for months, carefully timing the announcement to maximize impact while minimizing internal disruption. And what about his personal feelings? Can you imagine being a father, knowing the consequences your actions will have on your children? Charles has long been criticized for his handling of family matters, from his early years with Diana, to the challenges with William and Harry, to now navigating the unprecedented public lives of Harry and Meghan. Approving this measure required balancing personal emotion against duty to the institution. A delicate act, one that some say he performed with surgical precision, and others claim with a cold, calculated resolve. The timing of Charles's approval is also significant. 2 minutes ago, the vote was publicized. In the same moment, his signature transformed theory into reality. Some insiders argue that the speed of the approval was intentional, a display of decisiveness designed to prevent leaks, speculation, or even pushback from advisors who might have second thoughts. Others argue it was a calculated emotional move, a warning to Harry and Meghan that attempts at independence from royal protocol would have consequences. And then there's the question of strategy. What comes next? Charles had to anticipate not only the immediate fallout but the long-term implications. Stripping Harry and Meghan of their titles could ignite public outrage, stir media frenzy, and create tension among the remaining royals. He also had to consider international reactions. The monarchy isn't just a British institution, it's watched globally, with political, diplomatic, and cultural ripples that extend far beyond the palace walls. Charles's decision, therefore, wasn't made in isolation. It was part of a complex chess game involving perception, loyalty, and legacy. Even within the palace, there were differing opinions. Some advisors reportedly cautioned against the move, arguing it could be interpreted as unnecessarily harsh. Others argued that failing to act decisively would embolden Harry and Meghan further, potentially eroding public confidence in the monarchy. Charles had to weigh these conflicting perspectives, balancing the advice of his closest confidants with his own instincts. Imagine the private meetings that unfolded in those moments. The king seated at his desk, surrounded by a mix of legal advisors, senior staff, and perhaps a few trusted family members. Papers on the table, discussions tense, voices hushed but urgent. The final signature required a careful consideration of wording, implications, and timing. And in the end, Charles chose action over hesitation, decisiveness over delay. It was a moment that would define his reign as much as it defined Harry and Meghan's lives. And yet, even with this decisive act, questions remain. Did Charles foresee the full emotional impact on his son? The private heartbreak? The anger and disbelief that would ripple through social media and press coverage? Was there a personal reckoning behind his public composure? Insiders hint at late-night calls, whispered conversations, and moments of reflection that are unlikely to ever reach the public eye. The man who has spent decades preparing to reign now had to weigh familial bonds against institutional stability and make a choice that few fathers could bear. But here's where the tension truly escalates. Some sources suggest that Charles's decisiveness may have backfired. There are rumors of private communications intercepted by the couple's aides, perhaps even preemptive messages from Meghan signaling readiness to respond. The palace, while outwardly composed, is now bracing for a storm. Because approving this vote is one thing, controlling the fallout is another. And when a family is scrutinized as the royals experiences this level of public upheaval, no action exists in a vacuum. Could this decision spark a confrontation between Charles and William? William, protective of the monarchy, may interpret his father's decisiveness as a necessary measure, or as a slight against his own vision for the family's public image. The dynamics between father and son, once private, are now playing out under the unblinking gaze of global media. Every word, every gesture, every interview could ignite further tension, and the ripple effects could reach all corners of the royal household. And the most provocative question of all, how did Charles feel in that moment, alone in his office, knowing that 2 minutes ago, he had irrevocably changed the course of his son's life? Did he experience satisfaction, regret, fear? Perhaps all three. Or perhaps the weight of duty overshadowed emotion, leaving only the cold clarity of responsibility. Whatever the truth, the decision is irreversible. And now, the palace waits. The public watches. And Harry and Meghan are forced to navigate a world in which their roles, their titles, and their very identities have been fundamentally altered. But the story doesn't stop here. Because while King Charles's approval set the legal wheels in motion, it also triggered a cascade of private actions that no one outside the inner circle has yet seen. Secret letters, urgent phone calls, and whispered counsel are all part of the unfolding drama. And what comes next will test loyalties, reveal fractures in the family, and expose truths that many assumed were long buried. 2 minutes ago, the vote passed. 2 minutes ago, the king approved it. But what happened in the palace after that would ignite a storm that no one, inside or outside, was prepared for. She saw the headlines before anyone else, and she was furious. Can you picture it? Sitting in a quiet California home, scrolling through your phone, only to see that the world has just changed your life forever. 2 minutes ago, the UK Parliament voted. 2 minutes ago, King Charles approved. And just like that, Meghan Markle's royal titles were gone. Duke and Duchess of Sussex? Erased. Privileges, ceremonial duties, and public recognition? Gone. In an instant, her identity, at least in official terms, had been stripped away. The immediate reaction was disbelief. Not because Meghan hasn't faced public scrutiny before. She has. But because this felt different. This was personal. This was not a tabloid story, a media feud, or a subtle slight. This was a formal, legal, and irreversible act by the very institutions that once embraced her. Imagine the emotional impact. Validation one moment, erasure the next. The duality would shake anyone to their core. For Meghan, a woman known for poise and careful control of her narrative, the shock cut deeper than any headline ever could. Her first instinct was likely private fury. She reportedly paced the room, rereading the articles, checking timestamps, searching for errors. Was it real? Could it be reversed? Every cell in her body screamed against the injustice she felt. Every memory of being courted by the media, heralded by the public, and brought into the royal fold now seemed tinged with irony. How had it come to this? How had the dream of being both a royal and independent woman collided with such a harsh reality? Sources close to Meghan suggest that her first calls went to her closest allies, friends, aides, and legal advisors. Every word, every tone, was likely calculated. But there was also emotion, a raw, human response. Imagine the conversations, half planning a media response, half lashing out in disbelief. Could you imagine calling a friend and saying, "They've taken my titles, my name, my work, my identity gone," and they did it in 2 minutes? It's the kind of thing that would freeze your brain, leaving you alternating between tears, rage, and planning. And then there was the anger at timing. 2 minutes ago, everything was legal, official, unstoppable. 2 minutes ago, a moment of unprecedented personal and public betrayal became real. Meghan has always been strategic, calculating, and media-savvy, but the immediacy of this move left her with little time to prepare. The feeling of being blindsided by history itself is something very few people can imagine. How do you respond when the world changes your life before you can even take a breath? The psychological impact cannot be understated. Titles are more than names. They are shields, symbols, and status markers. For Meghan, losing the Duchess of Sussex designation was akin to losing a layer of protection. It made her vulnerable in ways she had fought so hard to avoid. Publicly, she could still assert influence. Privately, however, the erosion of identity is corrosive. It undermines confidence, injects doubt, and ignites anxiety. How do you maintain composure when institutions conspire, seemingly instantly, to rewrite your life story? And yet, Meghan is nothing if not resilient. The very qualities that allowed her to navigate Hollywood, media scrutiny, and royal protocols have also prepared her for rapid crisis management. Within minutes, she reportedly began planning. Legal teams were engaged. Strategists were consulted. Media consultants drafted potential responses. Every move calculated. Every statement weighed for maximum effect. She wasn't just reacting. She was strategizing, even amid the personal upheaval. But let's not forget the private dimension. Sources suggest that Harry's support was immediate but quiet. There is no doubt he felt the sting of this parliamentary blow as well, but Meghan's reaction was uniquely visceral. This was about more than status. It was about respect, recognition, and identity. The fury, the indignation, the feeling of injustice. These emotions, all valid and raw, were compounded by the public spectacle. In 2 minutes, everything she had worked for, everything she had defended publicly, had been stripped away. And then came the decision to act. Meghan has never been one to remain passive in the face of perceived injustice. Some insiders hint at late-night conference calls with advisors in London and Los Angeles. Others suggest the couple was already preparing a public statement, not reactive but proactive. The question is, how do you respond when the world has just taken something fundamental from you? In a manner both sudden and total? Do you lash out publicly? Do you retreat into private strategy? Meghan, as always, would likely consider both, but the pressure of the moment magnified everything. And of course, there were whispers about personal anger at King Charles. Not publicly, not yet, but privately, Meghan may have viewed this as a betrayal. The very man who signed the approval, who is family, who she once addressed with respect and care, had sanctioned an act she perceived as deeply personal. How does one reconcile respect for a family elder with outrage at their action? How do you maintain composure when the person wielding power also holds personal ties? The tension between duty, family, and identity was palpable and likely suffocating. The public dimension added another layer. Within minutes, social media erupted. Supporters rallied online, critics gloated, and commentators dissected every angle. For Meghan, this was not simply a private family crisis. Every emotional spike was amplified 1,000-fold. Every reaction, every post, every opinion could influence public perception and, by extension, her future strategy. It was a storm in a bottle, and the bottle had just been uncorked. And let's not forget the children. Sources suggest Meghan's concern was immediate. How would this affect Archie and Lilibet? Titles may be stripped, but identity is carried through family, heritage, and public perception. She knew that the fallout wouldn't stop with her. It would extend to her children, shaping public perception for years to come. Could this decision by Parliament, approved by Charles, alter how the world sees her family? Could it redefine the narrative of Harry and Meghan's legacy? And yet, even amid anger, planning, and fear, Meghan's strategic mind worked relentlessly. She considered the timing, the optics, and the messaging. Would she issue a statement? Would it be conciliatory, defiant, or a calculated mix of both? Could she leverage this as a media opportunity, turning adversity into influence? The answer lies in the next few hours. And insiders suggest the plan was already taking shape, carefully calibrated to hit multiple targets simultaneously: public perception, media narrative, and political optics. But even with strategy, emotion cannot be entirely contained. There are accounts of tension-filled moments, of conversations where frustration boiled over, where words were sharper than intended, where silence carried the weight of fury. Can you imagine sitting in a room, knowing that everything you believed in, everything you fought for, has just been challenged by both family and government? It's not just a title that's lost. It's dignity, security, and the validation of years of effort. And here's the twist. Meghan's reaction wasn't just private anger. Sources suggest that within hours, her team had already started planting stories, strategically leaking hints about the emotional toll and the perceived injustice. This wasn't chaos. It was a controlled escalation. Every move calculated, every leak measured for maximum impact. She knew the world would be watching. She knew the media would dissect her every word. And she knew that in order to survive this storm, she needed to act before the storm acted on her. By the time Parliament's press release was fully circulated, Meghan had already composed herself publicly, but the private storm was far from over. Advisors reportedly warned that every reaction would be analyzed, dissected, and potentially weaponized by critics. Every interview, every social media post, every statement would carry weight far beyond the immediate moment. And Meghan, true to form, was prepared, poised, calculating, and ready to leverage both emotion and strategy to maintain control. And just as you think this chapter reaches equilibrium, the tension escalates. Rumors began circulating of a secret phone call between Meghan and a high-ranking palisade. Some claim it was conciliatory, others say it was confrontational. Either way, the seeds of the next chapter were planted. Because while titles may be gone, influence can be wielded, and Meghan knows how to wield it better than almost anyone. 2 minutes ago, the vote was approved. 2 minutes ago, King Charles signed. And within hours, Meghan's reaction would ensure that the story was far from over. What she did next would reverberate through the monarchy and the public in ways no one saw coming. For Harry, this was more than a title being stripped away. It was a seismic rupture of identity, legacy, and family. Imagine the moment he first heard the news. 2 minutes ago, Parliament had voted. 2 minutes ago, King Charles had approved. And in the span of a heartbeat, the Duke of Sussex ceased to exist officially. The titles he had carried proudly, symbols of both heritage and responsibility, were gone. How do you even process something like that when the entire world is watching? Harry's reaction was immediate, but layered. At first, disbelief. He stared at his phone, rereading headlines, double-checking timestamps, searching for some sort of error. Could this be real? Could a decision of this magnitude occur so abruptly, leaving no room for negotiation, for explanation, for understanding? And then, as disbelief faded, shock gave way to a tidal wave of emotion. Anger, frustration, and a profound sense of betrayal. This was deeply personal. Harry had long struggled with the pressures of royal life, the weight of expectations, and the unrelenting scrutiny of media and public opinion. He had fought to carve out a life that allowed him to balance duty with personal freedom, often clashing with tradition, and sometimes making choices that invited criticism. Yet nothing prepared him for this. Nothing could soften the blow of a formal decree, approved by his own father, that effectively erased his identity in the public sphere. Imagine being in Harry's shoes. Every title you've earned, every ceremonial role, every public engagement tied to your ducal status, vanished. Titles aren't just ceremonial. They carry privilege, influence, and a certain level of protection. Their removal signals vulnerability. It signals that the institution, and even family, will act decisively against you if they perceive a breach of protocol or defiance. For Harry, the implications were as practical as they were emotional. His first instinct was likely to reach out to Meghan. They had weathered storms together before, but this was different. This was formal, legal, and irreversible. A moment where both public and private emotions collided. Sources suggest that their initial conversations were raw, fueled by disbelief and anger. How could his own father approve such a move? Was this a message about loyalty, a punishment for past defiance, or simply the cold calculus of monarchy? Every possible explanation felt simultaneously plausible and unbearable. The breakdown was not only emotional, but logistical. What did this mean for his responsibilities? For Archewell? For the foundation he had built with care? Stripped of royal titles, certain permissions, financial arrangements, and ceremonial roles were instantly affected. Advisors and aides scrambled to understand the full scope, drafting contingency plans, legal responses, and public statements. And through it all, Harry had to maintain composure, or at least project it, to ensure that Meghan and their family remained protected from the fallout. But beyond practical concerns, the personal anguish was profound. Harry's relationship with his father has always been complicated, fraught with tension, disappointment, and moments of misunderstanding. This decision, swift and irrevocable, added a new layer of complexity. Was Charles aware of the emotional devastation he was causing? Did he foresee the public spectacle, the social media frenzy, the personal anguish? Or was the decision purely institutional, cold, and calculated, detached from familial loyalty? The emotional tension didn't stop there. Harry, unlike Meghan, had long lived in the shadow of public expectation. The spare of the monarchy, always compared to his older brother William, constantly measured against historical precedent and media narratives. Losing his ducal title was not merely symbolic. It reinforced the very narrative of exclusion he had battled his entire life. This was, in effect, a public confirmation of the isolation he often felt within his own family. And yet, amid the breakdown, there was also strategy. Harry may have been shaken, but he is not naive. He understood that any outward display of rage or despair could be weaponized against him. He knew that public perception was now as critical as the private emotional toll. He needed to balance raw emotion with tactical restraint. Reports indicate that he engaged legal counsel immediately, planning steps to protect both himself and his family. Every word, every gesture, every statement would be carefully measured to avoid further escalation while retaining leverage. The mental strain, however, cannot be understated. Emotional turbulence layered over public scrutiny creates a pressure cooker environment. How do you grieve publicly? How do you respond strategically when every private conversation could become public fodder? For Harry, the stakes were multiplied exponentially by media attention. Every report, every headline, every tweet carried the potential to escalate the crisis. And in those first hours after the vote, the storm was only beginning to take shape. Social media amplified the emotional breakdown. Within minutes, hashtags erupted. Fans expressed shock and outrage. Supporters voiced anger at the perceived injustice. Critics gloated. Harry and Meghan's social media feeds, intentionally or not, became a battleground. Public sentiment swung wildly between sympathy, curiosity, and judgment. How does one process personal trauma while the world simultaneously reacts, analyzes, and passes verdict? This is a modern kind of crisis, where private breakdowns are immediately mirrored by global attention. Family dynamics added another layer. William and Charles, meanwhile, were navigating their own emotional and political landscapes. Sources suggest that Harry's anger and disappointment were compounded by the knowledge that William might perceive this move as aligning with institutional stability rather than familial loyalty. Could this be a wedge? A catalyst for further division within the royal household? The palace, long a center of tradition, was now a pressure cooker of conflicting loyalties and private grievances. And then there's the future to consider. Losing titles is not just about the present moment. It is about legacy. How does Harry now define himself publicly? How does he protect his family, his brand, his reputation? What will this mean for future engagements, for his charitable work, for the children growing up in a world where official recognition has been stripped away? Each of these questions carries weight, and the answers were still unknown. Even in the midst of breakdown, Harry reportedly began considering options. Legal recourse, media strategy, public statements, private negotiations, all became part of an unfolding plan. There is a sense that despite the shock, despite the grief, he understood that action would be necessary. He could not remain passive. In this moment, Harry's breakdown was not a surrender. It was a prelude to the next move, a recalibration of strategy under extreme pressure. But the emotional stakes were still raw. Sources indicate moments of despair, private arguments with aides, and long silences where the weight of the moment seemed almost unbearable. Can you imagine being caught between anger at your father, concern for your family, and the scrutiny of the world? Every instinct demanded immediate action. Every rational calculation suggested measured restraint. And Harry had to navigate both simultaneously, under the bright, unrelenting glare of public attention. And then came the whispers. Rumors that Meghan had already begun coordinating a media response, that legal counsel was assessing options, and that the palace itself was bracing for an escalation. Harry, in the midst of his breakdown, was not alone, but he was acutely aware that every move could have consequences. Every emotional spike could be exploited. Every public statement could ignite further controversy. The pressure was unrelenting, and the storm was only gaining momentum. 2 minutes ago, the vote passed. 2 minutes ago, King Charles approved it. And now, Harry faced the full force of its impact. Personal, familial, and public. What he did next would shape the narrative for months, possibly years. But what came next would not just be about titles or formalities. It would be about power, perception, and the fragile bonds of family under the harsh glare of history. The moment Parliament's decision went public, the world erupted. Can you imagine it? 2 minutes ago, Harry and Meghan's titles were stripped. 2 minutes ago, the king had approved it. And in the span of a single headline, social media, news outlets, and talk shows exploded. The reaction was instantaneous, unfiltered, and relentless. Hashtags trended within seconds. Tweets of outrage, disbelief, and ridicule flooded timelines. News anchors scrambled to capture the story, editors rushed to post breaking updates, and journalists dissected every nuance of the vote. It was chaos, and the couple at the center of it could only watch as the storm engulfed them. The public reaction was wildly divided. Supporters of Harry and Meghan flooded online platforms, expressing shock and indignation. "This is unfair," they wrote. "Two people trying to live their lives independently, and they are punished publicly?" There was an outpouring of sympathy for the couple, with commenters emphasizing the emotional toll of losing titles that were not just ceremonial, but personal markers of achievement, recognition, and identity. But the other side of the coin was just as loud. Critics of the couple celebrated. They shared headlines with glee, some mocking the decision, others framing it as long overdue accountability. "Finally," wrote one commentator, "titles aren't free. You can't step back and expect immunity." The polarization was instantaneous, and the discussion exploded across every corner of the globe. Even casual viewers, who may have followed royal news sporadically, were pulled in by the shock of the story. Within minutes, the narrative had captured international attention, and it was only beginning to unfold. Mainstream media outlets ran a mix of coverage, from factual reporting of the parliamentary vote to emotional op-eds analyzing the impact on the monarchy. Pundits debated, some suggesting that this was a necessary move to protect the institution, others arguing it was overly harsh and fueled by internal family tensions. Social media influencers and royal commentators added a layer of drama, producing videos, threads, and live streams, each spinning the story with their own interpretations and speculations. The media frenzy wasn't just reporting, it was shaping public perception in real time. Imagine the sheer volume of content: breaking news alerts pinging across phones, push notifications flooding email inboxes, tweets circulating with astonishing speed. For Harry and Meghan, the effect was overwhelming. Every scroll revealed a new headline, a new opinion, a new judgment. Every outlet seemed to have a different perspective, but all converged on the fact that their lives and their public roles had shifted irrevocably. And this was only the beginning of the storm. Even within the UK, the reactions were intense. Newspapers splashed front-page headlines across London, Manchester, and Edinburgh. Morning shows dissected the vote, some celebrating it, others questioning the King's decision. Radio programs hosted heated debates. Calls flooded in from the public, each opinion adding fuel to a fire that was already raging. And outside the UK, coverage in the United States, Canada, Australia, and beyond amplified the story to unprecedented levels. The global attention transformed what might have been a domestic political decision into a worldwide spectacle. Online, the polarization created a battlefield. Supporters and critics clashed in comment sections, posting memes, videos, and commentary with astonishing speed. Every media story became fodder for debate. Every opinion piece triggered counters and rebuttals. The pace was relentless. For Harry and Meghan, watching this digital deluge must have been both surreal and disorienting. Imagine seeing a headline celebrating the revocation of your title, followed by a heartfelt post from a fan showing support, all in the same minute. How do you process that? How do you navigate a world where emotion, opinion, and fact collide so violently and immediately? And then there were the personal attacks, the thinly veiled critiques, and the outright hostility. Social media trolls took advantage of the moment to mock, ridicule, and disparage the couple. Headlines framed them as rebels, entitled, or reckless. Commentary suggested they had brought this on themselves by stepping away from royal duties, by speaking out publicly, or by pursuing independent ventures. The emotional toll of this media frenzy cannot be overstated. Every reaction added weight to the psychological pressure, and the couple was not only facing public opinion, but an entire ecosystem of judgment amplified by technology. Yet amidst the chaos, there were moments of irony. Some of the outlets that had criticized Harry and Meghan for media attention were now contributing to the frenzy, generating revenue and engagement from the very spectacle they decried. Some of the commentators who had previously questioned the couple's motives were now dissecting their every move, providing detailed analysis of strategy, potential retaliation, and family dynamics. Contradictions emerged. The same media that condemned attention-seeking behavior became the conduit for the largest wave of attention in the couple's lives. Public sentiment was further complicated by the generational divide. Younger audiences, consuming news via social media platforms, often empathized with the couple's struggle for autonomy and independence. Older audiences, accustomed to traditional monarchy and ceremonial respect, tended to support the decision, viewing it as necessary to uphold the institution. This generational contrast magnified the debate, turning it into not only a story about titles, but a discussion about the evolution of monarchy, duty, and family loyalty in the modern age. The frenzy extended into political commentary as well. Analysts debated whether the vote was purely symbolic or a reflection of underlying power struggles within the palace. Some speculated that Charles's approval was a calculated move to assert authority and prevent further defiance from the younger generation. Others argued that it was a necessary step to maintain public confidence in the monarchy. Each theory fueled more discussion, more debate, more coverage, and more pressure. And amid all of this, insiders hinted at a hidden layer of intrigue. Sources suggested that certain leaks were intentional, designed to amplify reactions or manipulate public sentiment. Could the frenzy have been partially orchestrated? Was someone inside the palace or parliament deliberately seeding information to shape perception, to test the public's reaction, or to influence the couple's response? The possibility of deliberate narrative control adds a layer of tension that few outside the inner circle fully understand. Harry and Meghan, watching from afar, were forced to absorb the chaos. Reports indicate that both were overwhelmed by the speed, intensity, and global reach of the coverage. Every friend, ally, and associate contacted them, offering advice, support, or insight. Every hour brought new headlines, new commentary, new speculation. And in this maelstrom, decisions had to be made quickly, strategically, and decisively. Every move mattered because public perception could either support or undermine them, and the stakes were unprecedented. The emotional dimension of the public outcry was profound. Supporters celebrated, critics criticized, and the couple found themselves at the epicenter of a storm not of their making but amplified by the mechanisms of global communication. Could they weather this? Could they maintain composure, strategy, and control while the world scrutinized every response? For Harry and Meghan, the challenge was as much psychological as it was public. Every day, every headline, every trending topic became another test of resilience. And then came the leaks, the rumors, and the supposed insider insights. Anonymous sources began feeding stories about private meetings, the king's deliberations, and the couple's emotional state. Some reports were factual, others speculative. Some supportive, others damaging. The line between truth and fiction blurred, further amplifying the pressure. It was no longer simply a vote or a royal approval. It was a full-blown media spectacle, complete with twists, contradictions, and an escalating sense of drama. 2 minutes ago, the vote was approved. 2 minutes ago, King Charles signed. And in those 2 minutes, the public outcry and media frenzy had already escalated beyond control. What would Harry and Meghan do next? How would they navigate a storm that was as emotional as it was public? And perhaps most importantly, who would seize the next opportunity in this unfolding royal saga to strike, reveal, or escalate? The storm was just beginning. And no one outside the palace, or even inside, could predict exactly where it would go. There's more to this vote than meets the eye. On the surface, it looks like a straightforward parliamentary decision, signed off by King Charles. But beneath the headlines, behind the gilded walls of Westminster and Buckingham Palace, there's a web of political maneuvering, personal agendas, and secret whispers that very few outsiders will ever fully understand. And it's those hidden maneuvers that could ultimately shape the future of the monarchy far more than the vote itself. Imagine the scene just hours before the vote. Parliament was buzzing, not with routine debate, but with urgency. Private conversations were whispered in hallways. Meetings were scheduled in hidden rooms. Advisors leaned across desks, exchanging confidential information with a mixture of caution and intensity. Every word mattered. Every gesture could be interpreted as alignment, dissent, or even betrayal. This was political theater, power play, and historical rewriting, all rolled into one. Sources indicate that the decision to strip Harry and Meghan of their titles was influenced by multiple layers of persuasion. Some MPs were swayed by public sentiment, reading the waves of social media outrage and the chatter in newspaper columns. Others were guided by senior advisors inside the palace, who argued that decisive action was necessary to maintain the monarchy's credibility. and yet others had personal stakes. Some seeking to curry favor with senior royals, others using the vote as leverage in ongoing political games. Can you imagine trying to navigate that minefield? Every conversation carried potential consequences. Every vote was scrutinized for intention as much as legality. And then there were the leaks. In politics, nothing happens in a vacuum. Anonymous insiders were reportedly feeding selective information to journalists. Sometimes, these leaks were strategic, designed to shape public perception. Other times, they were retaliatory, meant to embarrass or undermine particular actors. The result? By the time the vote was formalized, the media narrative had already been partially written, shaped by the whispers of those who understood the levers of power. Some sources claim that certain members of parliament were even blindsided by the information that reached the public first, creating tension and suspicion among allies. The palace itself was a stage of subtle manipulations. Advisors and aides carefully filtered information before it reached the king, carefully choosing which details to emphasize and which to downplay. Some suggested that leaks were tested, gauging how public opinion might react before final approval. Others hinted at discreet meetings between Charles and key parliament members to coordinate messaging. Even the language of the parliamentary decree, the choice of words, the formal phrasing, was reportedly debated extensively, designed to convey authority while minimizing potential backlash. It's worth pausing to consider the human element. These maneuvers weren't just procedural, they were deeply personal. Many involved, from MPs to palace staff, had lived through prior royal controversies and were acutely aware of the stakes. They knew the potential for public backlash, for media frenzy, and for emotional fallout within the family. Some were motivated by loyalty to Charles. Others had grudges, ambitions, or hidden agendas. And in an environment where power and legacy intertwine, the stakes are never purely legal. They are intensely personal. One of the most intriguing layers involves Parliament itself. While the vote may appear unanimous in its procedural documentation, insiders suggest that there were dissenting voices, quietly objecting but outnumbered. Some MPs reportedly questioned whether this decision overstepped the balance between political authority and familial autonomy. Others wondered if the vote could set a dangerous precedent, allowing lawmakers to intervene more directly in private royal matters in the future. And yet, in the end, the decision passed, leaving only speculation about how the dissenters were persuaded, silenced, or strategically ignored. Meanwhile, behind the headlines, there were calculated signals sent to the palace. Certain leaks hinted at the king's position, the parliamentary strategy, and even public sentiment. These hints weren't accidental, they were intentional. Advisors reportedly used these leaks to test reactions, manipulate expectations, and gauge potential resistance from Harry, Meghan, and their supporters. In effect, the vote was only the final public step in a series of hidden moves that had been orchestrated behind the scenes for weeks. And then there's the timing, which is crucial. 2 minutes ago, the vote became official. But the hours leading up to it were carefully orchestrated to create a sense of inevitability. Public opinion, media narratives, and private conversations were aligned to ensure that when the decision landed, it would appear decisive, logical, and unavoidable. For Harry and Meghan, this timing magnified the shock. By the time they learned of it, the machinery behind the vote was already in motion, leaving little room for negotiation or mitigation. Financial considerations may have also played a subtle role. Some insiders suggest that Parliament, palace advisors, and political figures were aware of the couple's financial independence and media ventures. While not publicly cited, this knowledge may have informed the timing and framing of the vote. Stripping titles was not only a symbolic act, it potentially had implications for financial oversight, charitable endeavors, and property rights. In a sense, it was a move that combined institutional authority with strategic leverage, executed under the veil of tradition. And yet, there are contradictions. While the vote appeared to be about duty and protocol, some argue that personal motivations shaped the outcome far more than public statements admitted. Was it about the monarchy's integrity, or about asserting power over a son who challenged the system? Was it about maintaining public trust, or controlling a narrative that had already begun to spiral out of Charles's favor? The hidden political maneuvers suggest both, a blend of principle, pragmatism, and personal agenda. Even the smallest actors played roles in this complex tapestry. Staff members, junior advisors, and media consultants were all part of a carefully calibrated environment where leaks, briefings, and timing mattered. The vote's outcome was not a spontaneous act of justice. It was the result of intricate choreography, leveraging perception, timing, and influence. Every whisper mattered. Every suggestion could tip the balance. And as 2 minutes passed and the news broke globally, the impact of those hidden maneuvers became immediately visible. For Harry and Meghan, the realization of this hidden orchestration added to the shock. It wasn't just that their titles had been stripped, it was that the machinery behind the decision had anticipated and manipulated their responses, the media narrative, and public sentiment. They were not just participants. They were actors in a play directed by forces beyond their immediate control. And the more they realized the depth of these maneuvers, the more complex their own response would need to be. The intrigue didn't stop with Parliament or the palace. International observers noted subtle political influences as well. Commonwealth leaders and foreign media monitored the unfolding events, aware that the decisions in Westminster could have ripple effects across diplomatic and cultural networks. Some of these actors may have quietly advised, commented, or even influenced the timing indirectly. The vote, while legally domestic, had global reverberations. Every decision, leak, and whisper contributed to the storm that was already forming around Harry and Meghan. And then there's the personal betrayal, the human element hidden behind every calculated move. Sources suggest that certain individuals close to the couple may have contributed indirectly to the vote's passage. Whether by leaking information, consulting with Parliament, or even providing advice that inadvertently guided outcomes. The intersection of loyalty and manipulation, personal and political interests, created a web so complex that even seasoned observers struggled to fully understand it. 2 minutes ago, the vote was passed. 2 minutes ago, the king approved. And in that time, hidden political maneuvers had set a stage so intricate, so layered with strategy, secrecy, and subtle influence, that the public story was only a fraction of what had actually occurred. The next phase, Harry and Meghan's response, the palace fallout, and the global implications, was now inevitable. And just when it seemed that every move had been orchestrated perfectly, an unexpected leak surfaced, a hint of private correspondence that could upend everything. It suggested that someone inside the palace may have deliberately set the stage for a confrontation that no one anticipated. The tension was about to escalate, and what came next would force secrets into the open in ways no one could control.